Hello, everybody.
It's very intimate.
Welcome. Thanks for coming out. Good evening, and welcome to our November 6th, 2024 week-to-week political roundtable here at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. If you have a cell phone with you, please silence it.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm John Zipper. I'm your host for Week to Week, and I'm also the Commonwealth Club's Vice President of Media and Editorial. I'm so glad to see all of you here today, as well as everyone watching and listening online. And first of all, everyone, take a deep breath. The election's over. We're here. We'll survive.
Over, but not certified yet.
Well, I'm also not a certified psychiatrist or anything. I can't really offer grief therapy. But anyway, now we all just get to witness all the recriminations and accusations over the next couple months, at which point the 2028 race for the White House will kick off, I'm sure. So let's meet our panelists for tonight. They're all veterans of Week to Week. I'll just start right next to me and work down the line with Tim Anaya. He's the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Pacific Research Institute. He's also the co-author of the new book, The California Left Coast Survivor's Guide. Welcome, Tim. Next to him is attorney and political analyst Melissa Cain. Welcome back.
How we doing?
And last but not least, Joe Garofoli. He's the senior political writer for the San Francisco Chronicle, where he's also the host of the podcast, It's All Political on Fifth and Mission. Hello again, Joe.
Hello.
You all know how it works here. There are some cards spread throughout there. If you've got some questions, write them down. We'll have people bring up the questions to me, and I'll try to work them into our discussion. Always the pro tip is the earlier you get us the questions, the better. Toward the end of the hour, we tend to run out of time, of course. They should have some pencils, and if not, telepathy will work. So
There you go.
now, what program has the panelists actually pen? Okay, let's start with the big headline. Obviously, Donald J. Trump is our next president. He was reelected. I guess, is that reelected when you have an interregnum there?
We've been arguing about Grover Cleveland since his second election.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still out there.
He's been elected again to the White House, this time, though, with a majority of the popular vote, as well as the electoral vote. Last I saw, it was about 72 million to Harris's 63 million. For comparison, in 2016, Clinton had 65.8 million, and Trump had 62.9 million. Let's just kind of start with, at what point last night or when did you realize, okay, this was impossible for Harris to win it, this is a Trump victory? Tim?
Well, first I want to say, for all my friends here tonight who are feeling blue, no one has suffered through more bad election nights in California than a former California Republican staffer. So I feel your pain. I know what you're going through. We'll get through it together. So I would say for me, like about 8:30ish, 9 o'clock, I was watching Decision Desk, and they had the numbers faster, and it's actually a great site, and they all very user-friendly to get the data, and they were calling the races faster. So they had it actually at 270, certainly before 10.
What channel?
So they're with News Nation. So there's the website you can get on your own, but News Nation is another kind of news network, and so they were their Decision Desk for last night.
News Nation, if any of you remember the WGN Super Channel,
Yes.
when Tribune Media went through its...
Chris Cuomo's there now. That's
Yeah.
his new home. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're trying to target kind of a centrist approach, and they're based in Chicago. Melissa, I know you didn't find out until late because you were, in fact, working last night.
Yeah, I was a poll worker yesterday.
Oh.
Precinct 9409. And where I was, there was no cell service. And so we didn't know, actually, until, and I thought that we wouldn't know. It wasn't weird. I wasn't trying, I wasn't outside, trying to do the thing because I thought that it would take time for the race to be called. So I thought, oh, well, I'll just check it when I get out. And no one had said anything inside the polling station. And so it was just when Christopher picked me up and I sort of looked at the phone and it's an exhausting day, right? If any of y'all have ever done this, it's 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. straight through. And you're just like dead. And so I get in the car and I was like, oh my gosh. And I, like many of y'all, I woke up this morning and thought, did that happen? Had to double check and make sure I wasn't imagining things. So no, I didn't actually get to see the play-by-play, which is probably for the best, frankly.
Joe, how about you?
Yeah, I was in the newsroom all last night, and yeah, it was around 8:30 or so. Then you know we saw the early calls on Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and once Pennsylvania was so tight, and I was getting texts from all sorts of people like but it was from the from Democratic operatives, and they're like, oh no, what. There's a lot of people in line in Philadelphia in the black neighborhoods. I was like, okay, but I don't know, that didn't matter. So, yeah.
For me, it was noticing, I don't recall what point last night, I was watching The Bulwark. They were doing a live kind of critique of the feeds and everything, and they were showing Dane County in Madison, Wisconsin. That's
Yes.
capital of Wisconsin. It's one of the bluest of blue areas in the country, and it's basically like Dane County and then Milwaukee County is where in Wisconsin the Democrats need to run up super numbers to beat the more conservative rest of the state. And they said that at that point, whenever it was, that Donald Trump had 25 or 26%, which was way ahead of where he had been in previous elections. And they're like, that's going to be really hard for her to do that. And I was kind of like, okay, I'd already seen the other stuff you were talking about. I'd already seen Pennsylvania at that point leaning to Trump, and I figured, okay, it's not going to happen for her.
In Dane County, oh my goodness.
Well, and we were talking about this in the green room, and I wanted to get into this because I think this is the juicy stuff, which is just Trump performed better with just about every group, just about every demographic. In fact, both genders. I mean, men and women. So I think maybe black women he didn't do well with, but I mean, everyone else. So let's get into some of these. I mean, Latinos, he won a much bigger share than before. What was it, like 45?
45% of Latinos, which was higher than George W. Bush got in 2004, which was kind of the recent high mark. And he won 54% of Latino men.
He even performed better in San Francisco, as the Chronicle is reporting, at least based on the votes that we have so far. He's what did he have? Something like 16% versus 13%. I mean, it's not a ton, but it's bananas. I mean, this is Harris's hometown.
Republican registration is 7% for context, so he'd like doubled that.
And the places where he did really well were Outer Mission, Chinatown, McLaren Park, Portola, and Biz Valley. So, not Nob Hill, right? Not Presidio Heights. These are a far more diverse districts that he overperformed in.
And if you look across the country, kind of bigger cities across the country, it was a similar phenomenon of like a 4 to 8% bump.
And as the resident Marxist here, so I saw at Kaiser Family Foundation, they do good polling, and they said they were polling on abortion, and 45% of the people said abortion rights was a very important issue to them, but 63% or something said the high price of food was much more important, and gas was higher than that, and the cost of living. So your daily life was more important, and people looked back and said, well, who's been in charge the last 4 years? Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and she never did anything to differentiate herself. He was asked multiple times, what would you do differently than Biden? What policies would you step away from? She's like, no, I'm good. Well, so people were like, well, I don't want any more of that. So.
In the national exit poll, which is very interesting, if you really want to do a dive, you can go online. It's easy to find. Biden had a 58% disapproval rating yesterday. Trump won 80% of those votes.
Wow, that's a good stat.
People who voted for Biden and then Trump.
No, people who were disapproving of Biden.
People who disapproved of Biden.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. It's been a long couple days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's been, like I said, we're going to get weeks and maybe months of recriminations and accusations and wild theories. So I'm just going to get started right now. And one is just, did Biden help her or hurt her after he left the race? We all remember, the garbage comment and then her having to clean up after that. But overall, what's your sense of it? And maybe if you know anything, what are you hearing about it?
Initially, it helped her because he or she wasn't him, and he was the problem.
Yeah.
But then every time he sort of poked his head up, he didn't. I mean, that's reason why he wasn't the nominee, because he was not effective at it. They basically said you can go to Scranton and you can go to Philly, and just otherwise, be president. That's do your day job.
I think when it comes to Biden, though, the big knock on him that's sort of evolving is that he stayed too long, right? That he should have dropped out earlier, and had he dropped out earlier, there may have been either more time for Kamala Harris to build support or time for there to be a mini primary, so they could sort of shed some of the complaints about the lack of democratic process. And so this idea that his big problem, that his big the thing that he did to most hurt her wasn't the garbage comment. It was running, frankly, for re-election.
Running, which he said he was going to be a bridge to the next generation, but the bridge never came down until 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see the Democrats. The circular firing squad has formed, and there's going to be so much finger pointing and blaming, and it's this and that, and we've already started to see it, and it's going to be an ugly few months.
I thought it was interesting, and this was a stat I saw in the exit polling. So I think a lot of, if you watch TV over the last week and kind of was following what was going on in the campaign, I think the conventional wisdom, right, was Harris had a good last week.
Yeah.
Trump had a bad last week. If you look at how did people who decided to vote in the last week decide, Trump won those voters. And then they asked, if you decided in the last few days, how did you vote? Trump won those voters too. So
nothing matters.
Nothing matters? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Melissa, so having been right there, seeing voters all day long, what was, not to say the vibe, but what were you getting from them? What was your sense of the ground game and actual at the polling place? For those of us who vote by mail, we miss that.
It was really beautiful, actually. People were earnestly and unironically excited to do a thing that they believed was helpful for the world, for the country, for their community. And you never saw people so excited to get an I voted sticker. Like they would come back and go, can I get one more for my, and they would just, all right, I want the whole world to know I did a thing. And so people were excited to do it, it seemed to me. And it felt like it was really important, even though, and look, I'm never going to sort of go down, get down on that. But the idea that, that Kamala Harris wasn't going to win California, I was like, okay, like you were helpful, but, it wasn't like it was, hit or miss here in California. But it was really lovely to see people excited to do this, of course, to some degree out of fear, because they really felt like, and there were people who would come in and say, well, this is the last one, and then cast their vote and drop it off and say, well, I wanted to be here because this might be the last election we have. They were really scared. So really motivated and excited to be there. I felt there wasn't any, we didn't have electioneering. I was out near Ocean Beach. That's not where I live, but that's where they needed a person. So that's where I went. So actually the electioneering that we got had to do with, if y'all are local, there's that great highway issue out there. And so that was the thing that people were really fired up about and were, outside the polling station about. But that was really it. We didn't have, even though we know, because we saw the results, we know that some people voted for Donald Trump, we didn't have any sort of fighting in there. It was actually kind of lovely.
Cool. So we will get into some of the local propositions and, of course, the local and state.
Wait, I have to tell you a little quick story. Okay, so this is at an elementary school. So at one point you go to the restroom and everything is taken down here. I'm washing my hands. And there's these little girls in there and they're first grade, very, very cute. And one of them is washing her hands at the little sink next to me. And she's going, my dad voted, she's telling her friend, my dad voted for a Donald Duck. And, and her friend goes, Donald Trump? And she goes, oh yeah, that. And then the friend goes, oh dear.
That's great.
Why are first graders having this conversation? Anyway, I don't remember knowing who was president when I was in the first grade, but there we go. Anyway, I apologize. Go
Yes.
ahead.
Well, something that's apparently going to happen regardless of who won this election is that later this month, Donald Trump will be sentenced. It's still going to happen because it was scheduled and he hasn't yet jailed the prosecutor. So, what is this something that he can overturn or in any way have the Justice Department overturn when he does get in other words, is this
Can he
are
pardon
all of these
himself?
cases?
Right.
Yeah. Can he?
We'll see.
Yeah.
We don't actually
You're the
know.
expert on this.
Yes.
There is y'all should check this out. So the U.S. Supreme Court has a podcast where you can listen to all the oral arguments.
Cool.
Kind of interesting. So, but if you listen to the one on Trump's immunity, Judge Gorsuch starts getting into can the president pardon himself? And so he actually sort of gives a quick, it's very quick, but it's there, and expresses some skepticism about that. So I don't know that his guys are going to go for what he's selling there in terms of being able to pardon yourself. I can tell you there was no discussion of that in the constitutional Congress records of whether or not that should be a thing when they gave the pardon power to the president, that was ever a thing that they ever imagined anyone would do, that the people would never elect someone who would do such a thing. Aha. But here we are. So I'm not sure if that's going to fly. It will absolutely be litigated till, the cows come home. But will he try? You betcha. With the federal ones. Now remember, the state, it's only for federal crimes. So state crimes he could still be prosecuted for. He couldn't necessarily
So he still might go to jail for a parking ticket, but
not sexual assault.
okay. And related to that, apparently Jack Smith is looking to wind down his prosecutions of Trump on the assumption that once Trump is president, that the Justice Department will adhere to its longstanding position that you can't prosecute a sitting president. So, Trump's won a number of victories this week, really.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get to happy news. Don't worry.
Yes.
There's more coming. But, well, we have Republicans in here, so I don't mean to suggest that they haven't already received happy news. And for them, there's even more because the Republicans won control of the Senate, and the House has not yet been called, but from what I've seen, at least, it looks like it's trending toward the GOP.
It
but
looks
what do
like
you
Yeah,
it's
it
going to
is.
be about the same, right? About the
Yeah,
same margin.
the Democrats had to flip 4 seats to take control of the House, and they're down by 25 right now. The last I looked, it was there's a couple dozen seats out. So there were like 5 seats in California that could be still pivotal to Democrats getting control of the House. But in California, we take our time to count the ballots, and so it could be a couple weeks still before we know if it's still valid. If
we
it's
want
still
to prolong your misery over a whole month.
I think there are 12. What do they have? 12 races, and I'm not saying these aren't pivotal. They're probably just a handful that are pivotal. There are 12 races too close to call. District 9, which is Stockton, so just for Northern California. There's a lot of Southern California ones. There's 12 overall. We got Stockton and then Merced, District 13 are both too close to call. Those are the sort of 2 Northern California. Now the Republicans are a majority in the Senate, though, I'll be interested to see if Democrats still want to get rid of the filibuster, because it's a great idea when you're in the majority,
Right.
but now it's an important institution that is the bedrock of our democracy. Surely we should keep the 60 vote threshold.
Now you can confirm the cabinet if you've got 53 or 54 Republican senators. It makes it easier to confirm the appointees. And a Susan Collins can say, I don't like that appointee, because there's enough votes to, confirm that person without them. And, there are things you can pass without a filibuster. If you have both houses, that you can do rescissions of recently enacted regulations, which they did a lot in the first Trump administration, and there are every president kind of does this. They set up regulations to kind of be on the books and run out the clock at the end of their term. So you can't do anything about it because if it's still in the process, you could pull it. But if it's past the date of its effectiveness, you have to pass a congressional act to repeal it. So, you could do those things if you have a majority in the House and the majority in the Senate.
And one thing I know the Republicans are looking at is to claw back some of the subsidies on electric vehicles,
Yeah.
and so that is something to look forward to. So get your Chevy Bolts now, very quickly.
Because there'll be a big budget reconciliation bill early on, and that's kind of a pretty good free-for-all shot to put your stamp on federal spending. And so you can do a lot of things in that one bill, and I'm pretty sure it's a bill you can't filibuster.
Oh, interesting.
I know that.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
we got that to look forward to.
We have our first batch of questions from the audience, and they're great questions, by the way. One person writes, why? Why? Why?
Can we hug that person?
Yeah.
Someone else asks, will the Democrats realize and address the issue that some of their policies are disliked?
Well,
They lost
I think
now,
the
but-
voters are speaking of those policies, even in the liberal Bay Area. Where I live in Oakland, you're seeing the mayor recalled and the district attorney recalled, and that's definitely a pushback on policies involving on public safety. So, in that case, people are losing their jobs. So, and you spoke of Prop 36, which is another one where, voters are making their wishes known and their displeasure known at some of the Democratic policies. So.
But in 2016, after Hillary Clinton's loss, there was this whole thing of we're going to do postmortems. We're going to have, we're going to the Democratic Party is going to do a full, round of introspection
Autopsies,
and
yes.
yes, autopsies. We're going to do the whole thing, and I've never seen it.
No.
I don't think that they did. I think that maybe they got some wins after that and thought, oh no, the product is fine. We're gonna keep making it and selling it like we have been. And so I'm not total. I mean, while it would seem obvious that this is a thing that you need to do, anybody who's ever tried to sell a product can tell you if it's not selling, you need to rethink the product. But here we are, once again. Sort of asking why, and it's big, because they continue to double down on. Look, voters are not like hiding things. Like they're telling you what's important. It's the cost of groceries and gas and illegal immigration, and they are yelling it from the rooftops, and yet they're, everyone goes, well, gosh, I just don't know why they don't like us. And you're like, we're trying to tell you. So
Right.
whether or not they'll listen, I'm not as hopeful as I was in 2016.
This is why also, too, one of the criticisms of Kamala Harris as a candidate, right, was that it was a kind of a policy light campaign. There wasn't a lot of really super developed plans out there, especially on some of the thornier questions, like even Prop 36, for example. She publicly said, I don't want to give an answer one way or the other because that would influence the campaign. Heaven
But she is a
forbid.
Los Angeles resident.
Yes.
So
She'd already voted.
She was going to be voting on it, or did vote on it.
Yeah.
Believe me, we had we wrote a story about that and about her, and she wasn't the only one. LaFonza Butler, our sitting senator, wouldn't vote or wouldn't give an opinion on it. So I mean, it's just lame.
But it's sort of important, now obviously being at a think tank, I think policy is very important on everything that we do here. But, it's one of those things where, the challenge in trying to turn the page from Biden, when you have a 58% disapproval rating, voters had kind of decided at the start, we want to change the administration. So your job is, well, I'm the acceptable person to change the administration too. And a lot of it is inflation, costs, all of these sorts of things. And it's not satisfactory to a voter who's struggling to make ends meet, struggling to afford rising housing costs and afford rising gas prices to say, hey, the numbers say it's good. You got nothing to worry about. We've gotten past the inflation. All is good. And that's all that they really had to talk about. And so, and even the one real issue that she talked about that was a really developed plan on price gouging, well, I wrote about in my book, if you kind of go through really the issue of price gouging, it's a lot of bad ideas that are going to drive up costs and drive down the availability of supply in grocery stores. So even the one kind of developed plan wouldn't really help your issue of high costs. So it's you can't be too clever. You can't be too, I don't want to rock the boat too much. You're running for president. You've got to say what you're going to do. You got to look people in the eye when they're telling you they're hurting. You got to speak from the heart and say, here's what I'm going to want to do for you. And when you don't do that, you're not going to win those voters you need to win, and you're leaving a big void for your opponent to come in and swoop those voters up for him.
Right.
Well, he didn't get.
Yeah.
He didn't get some.
You're
so,
right.
Yeah,
I agree.
we'll all be paying for tariffs.
Yes. Tariffs are terrible. They're not free market.
Well, along the lines of some of these issues of what exactly was tipping them off, someone asked, I'm going to paraphrase this, how much do you think Harris's loss and Trump's win had to do with, say, the past, 40 years or so of economic policy and the greater inequality that's really been baked in, that's really had people where when they get to rents suddenly spiking, that they've got nothing else, that's it. And how much do you think was, race or gender?
Both are true. I think both are true. I mean, that goes back to what what voters have been telling us. The rent's too damn high, and the price of food and daily life is too high, and the affordability. We live here in the most expensive area in the world. We know that, but it's a nationwide thing. And also, you can't discount race and gender. We saw some of the most racist and sexist tropes flying around in this campaign, where Trump says Harris, she just suddenly became black. I mean, what the hell is that? And it's ridiculous. If it wasn't so racist, it's just ignorant, if nothing else. So I mean, but both are true, I think, and. Until America elects a female president or a black female president, I mean, the jury's still out on that.
I think if Kamala Harris was a white guy, she still would have lost. Like, yes, is there racism and sexism? Sure, yeah, and I'm not saying that that's not deplorable. But what I'm saying is, if Kamala Harris was Carl Harris and was a white guy, still would have lost. The people don't want to buy what you're selling. At the end of the day, there are people who voted for Obama, who voted for Trump, who voted for, Biden, who voted for Trump. Like it's not always the deciding thing. It may color people's view, but ultimately it's about rent and food and money, and that's.
So
I don't know if there's any studies on that, but I honestly, I think ultimately the Democrats have the wrong policies, and the problem with chalking it up to, not that you did, the problem with chalking it up to racism, sexism is you don't get to the real problem, and so next time you go, oh well, I'll just run a white guy saying the same stuff, and you're going to lose again.
So I would look at it through the lens of policy. So if you're looking at, I mentioned earlier in the exit poll, right, that she lost Latino men, and she got 45% of Latino voters overall. So when you look at
Trump got
45% of Latino voters overall. So when you look at it, okay, so you look at kind of what is she talking about policy-wise. So one of her big issues was we're going to enact a national version of California's AB 5, which is the law we passed a few years ago that's a lot of restrictions on independent contractors and your ability to work as you wish and entrepreneurship. Well, if you're a Latino man in one of these swing states and you're looking at, hey, I want to start my own business to get ahead, to climb the economic ladder and provide better for my family, and she's going to pass a policy that makes it harder for me to start a business and work as I wish. Or she's going to enact certain green policies that they might be good for the environment, but they're going to add a lot of cost to me as a business owner. I'm not going to be able to afford to start a business or make it on my own. That's how I kind of look at it, is got to look at policy through the lens of who are the constituencies you're trying to appeal to. And if your policies are going to directly or indirectly negatively affect that group, well, maybe you should think through your policies a little more to have something to offer to everybody.
Right. It was just like a couple years ago where the state was thinking of it was to give a break on electric vehicles, and they were going to raise bridge tolls. Well, I mean, the people who drive gas-powered vehicles and drive to work every day, generally middle working class folks. I mean, that hits them right in the stomach. So you're not. They may. You have to think of the overall policy implications of something like that, and too often Democrats don't.
On the gender side, I would note we had a number of Democratic candidates who ran ahead of Harris. In other words, in their states and their districts, they got higher percentage of votes, and that included Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, who narrowly won her Senate reelection, and Elissa Slotkin, is that who won a Senate seat in Michigan. So both did better. I think Biden and Biden policies and everything, and her inability maybe to really do that, like you were saying. How am I going to be different from him?
She said turn the page, but there wasn't a lot written on her page that was
Right.
that was different. When you turned it, it was like, okay, what's on
Right.
your page?
Okay, so as expected, in a race that frankly could have been called back in January, Congressman Adam Schiff won the U.S. Senate seat. I think they've counted 1% of the votes or whatever, and they know it's going to be him.
That was a quick call, yes.
Yeah,
that
he,
was a quick call.
Easily dispatched Steve Garvey, who apparently didn't realize he was supposed to campaign.
I think he spent more time campaigning in Israel than he did in California. He made a trip to Israel early in the general election. And he campaigned a lot in Dodger Stadium. Like he would go to Dodger Stadium and just walk around. People were like, "Hey, Garvey!" It was like, "Well, dude, you gotta get out of Chavez Ravine." And
I'm so popular here.
Right.
people love me. But I when I first sat down with him, I grew up watching Steve Garvey play. I was like, "Oh my God, this guy's the Hall of Fame, should be in the Hall of Fame." And so then I asked him, I was like, "Are you running just so you can get in the Hall of Fame?" He goes, "Nah, they'd never take me," because I thought maybe he was just boosting his name ID for the Hall of Fame. But because I couldn't figure out what he was doing, because he said in January, I said, "Steve, you haven't spelled out any policies." I will later, like in April or May. I said, but the primary's in March. And then it was also I should be shitting all over Steve Garvey, but he was also I remember him as for baseball fans of the '70s. You remember Steve Garvey had the big forearms. He was a big guy. He was like my size. Like, oh my God, that's so disappointing.
Last week, I did a radio interview on a station in the Midwest promoting my book. And so whenever you do a radio interview, you call in and they put you on hold for a few minutes before it's your time. So the host comes on in the commercial break to say hello, and he says, wants to know kind of what's going on out in California. He said, "Hey, I just heard a poll that the U.S. Senate race out there, Steve Garvey's within single digits of Adam Schiff." And I said, "Well, I hate to burst your bubble there, but that ain't going to happen."
Yeah.
So I don't know who was promoting what there, but that was, do not hire that pollster if someone was promoting that poll.
The do not hire list.
Well, speaking of polls, Joe, let's talk about San Francisco. Currently, the mayor's race hasn't been called. Things are kind of looking like it might be Lurie, but it's not set. What can you tell us about
He's probably going to win. And we crap on pollsters all the time, but I got to say the Chronicles poll, if the current numbers hold, nailed it exactly. So, props to the Chronicle poll. It's a lonely golf clap here.
It's hard to poll rank choice. So.
It's very hard to poll rank choice, but somehow our pollster did it. Yeah, and this is this is a guy who has never held public office before. He is heir to the Levi Strauss fortune. He put $8 million of his own money in the race, and then his mom kicked in $1 million on her own. And so some of the other candidates, like Asha Safai, who's the supervisor in San Francisco, he said, "Well, my mom gave $150 to my campaign," but none of that mattered to voters. They're like, because he said, because they all would they pick on him and or pick on Lurie, pick on a billionaire, and they said this guy's never held public office. This is a hell of a first job. The $15-16 billion budget, 32,000 city employees. How's this guy going to handle it? And he's like, well, look at these other people. They all have all this experience in city government. Do you like the way San Francisco's going? Voters sided with him. And it's not that voters here are like, it's not that you're a rich person that's bad. It's if you're a rich asshole. And Lurie came across as a nice guy. And look who we've elected here in San Francisco. Dianne Feinstein, she's worth $88 million before her last campaign. Nancy Pelosi is worth $200 million. Voters didn't have problems reelecting them. So Lurie, but this will be a test because he is a newbie, and who's he going to surround himself with? And will he be able to? Who will he be able to influence? Will he be able? We don't have any history of this guy. How is he going to work with the board of supervisors? Who's he going to be listening to? Who's in his ear? And who, so we'll see. His heart is in the right place. The guy, a rich guy, but he did, start an anti-poverty organization, the Tipping Point, which did a lot of good work. So his heart's in the right place. We'll see what he can do as an executive.
This is trivia that none of you will care about, but the Chronicle pollster is a veteran and former colleague of Joe's wife at the same student newspaper in Madison,
Wow.
Wisconsin that I worked at.
I didn't know. I don't think she knew that. I don't think she knows who the pollster is.
That and $3 will get you a cup
Yeah,
of coffee.
that is tremendous knowledge. I'll have to tell Christine that.
Well, Daniel Lurie, that was his biggest applause line at all the debates. They'd always attack him for his experience, and then he would go, "What experience? Is this what you want? This is the experience you want? Look at what these people have done," and the people would go crazy no matter where it was. It was a great line. There was a let me digress for a moment. There's this bodega in my neighborhood that shut down because there was a homeless encampment nearby. They kept encroaching, and so the bodega owner says, we're shutting down. And it was the one place where you could go to get a last minute thing. Now we have to go several blocks away now. Whatever. It's, poor me. But it was an important little place. It had been there for 40 years. Everybody knew it and knew the owners and such. The one person who came out on the last day that this store was open, sort of final day, everyone came in and was saying bye to all the people who we knew, who worked there, was Daniel Lurie. He showed up. And he was there, and he was shaking hands, and he was talking to people, and he was listening to people. And he was the guy who, every time something happened, and when Macy's was closing, he was there, right? 11 a.m., he would send out a media thing, I'm available. He was always there making himself available and really talking to people and listening to them. And it's that kind of, even though he's, trust fund kid or whatever, the truth is that kind of just sort of gumshoe politicking. You didn't need anything fancy. You just needed to show up when things were happening and talk and listen to people. And I don't know where or when it happened, but he became the guy, right? Farrell was the guy, and then suddenly we looked up and it was Lurie's the guy.
Right.
Like, I don't even know how
Farrell
that happened.
had a lot of problems with skirting the law. So, he did things that were just sort of like, you can't really do that. And then during the Chronicle KQED debate, he's like, by the lawyers said it was okay. It's like, and then so my colleague Marisa Lagos goes, but those are your lawyers. That isn't the law. So,
Unless you have anything on San Francisco.
I think what's interesting, kind of all these, races around here, right? The mayor's race and the vote on Prop 36, even locally, Prop 36, we were talking backstage, won in every county in the state. Prop 36 won 65% of the vote in San Francisco and Alameda counties. You look at the DA recall, you look at the Oakland mayor's recall, and kind of my thread through all those, right, is that you might look at kind of the politics of the cities and the communities overall and think, oh, well, those folks should have no problem, right? Or we'd never vote for Prop 36 here. But I think it shows you're kind of getting a growing trend of quality of life is trumping, maybe I shouldn't use trumping tonight.
Too soon.
Too soon, sorry.
It's trigger word in this crowd.
Quality of life, right, is taking precedent over partisanship or ideology.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, right, if you're a Democrat or Republican, but, you know, if you walk out to the car in the morning and your window's smashed, you don't want to live like that. And, you know, you're going to maybe take a chance in voting on a ballot measure a particular way. Or you might say, you know, I might be inclined to reelect the mayor, but, you know, things are getting worse on her watch. Or maybe her policies are making it worse. It's time to try somebody else or try a different way.
Or maybe
Even
her
here.
house was raided by the FBI. If you're
There's that,
In
too,
Oakland.
right?
In Oakland, yes.
And of course, you guys know that George Gascon lost his reelection bid down in
Yeah.
LA to a former Republican, but sort of more
Yeah.
law and order type person as well. So, in addition to the Oakland recalls and our recall, you have George having a bad day between Prop 36 and losing reelection. So there does seem to be a real, and it's not to say it's a necessarily wholesale rejection of all progressive policies, because other ballot measures, like Prop L, I think the Uber tax is winning here in San Francisco. You have the OIG ballot measure that was put on there by Aaron Peskin that's also doing well. So it's not like everyone's just sort of gotten rid of everything, but there's this public safety element where people are really making themselves heard on that issue, on statewide measures and locally.
and local,
One that's a little closer than in fact, it was losing last night. I think it's ahead now, is Prop D in San Francisco for you San Francisco voters, which is to cut the number. There's 100. In fact, they don't know how many commissions there are in San Francisco. It's somewhere between 115 and 135 commissions. You know, all the, and so this would just, you know, take a meat cleaver to it and just say there's 65 commissions, and then we'll figure out which ones they are. And that one is barely winning right now. And that you would think would be a response to government isn't working. Let's make it work better for us. And that's a major complaint with a lot of people. And there's a rival one that Peskin put on. That one was, I think that was Farrell's. And then this one was Peskin's would set up a commission to study the commissions or something like that. something along those lines. But it's a more measured approach, you know, to figure out what to do. So that's kind of not the meat cleaver, but that would be what would that be? I don't know.
Paring knife,
A paring knife, yeah, we'll go with that.
Well, we were talking backstage right now between we've got some turnout issues here, right? So San Francisco did not vote in the numbers that they did in 2016 and then in 2020, which again is kind of wild when you think about who's on the ballot. In 2016, you had about 400,000. 2020, about 411,000. We're on track now, based on numbers we're getting from the elections department, for 390,000. So it's not, you know, a million, but it's, you know, you'd think if somebody local was on the ballot, you'd have, you know, an upsurge and the enthusiasm to come out and cast a vote, but it's actually lower. And so that's just another example of the underperformance that we're seeing with the Harris campaign. And it could be in San Francisco, this could be people who are upset about her stances on Gaza, for example. So it could be, you know, sort of not just necessarily folks on the right, but folks on the left who are not turning out to vote as a protest.
There is bright side to all this for Democrats. I think you all know United has daily one-way flights to from SFO to Canada, so you can go to Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver. Really not expensive.
I love every time that the Democrats lose a national election. That's all they talk about. It's like leaving the country. I would love to see the stats on how many people actually leave. even my wife last night when I got home, she's like, "We are moving to Portugal," and I was like, first of all, why would we move? I don't know anybody there. I don't speak the language. I mean, my family, we're far from our family. Why would I move there? I mean, there's good food and good wine, but I was like, I can get that here.
Madeira is lovely. 300 days.
Portugal, I've been there. It's a lovely country. I love Lisbon.
Yes.
I love Porto. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I wouldn't. We have to move there. Why don't we just stay and
Buy some wine.
and buy some Portuguese,
Yeah, wine's
buy
not
some
too bad
port
here.
wine.
Yes.
Canada's going to have to build a wall.
That's right.
We'll pay for it. Okay, so each of you, whatever level of government, or even if it's a ballot measure versus whatever, give me kind of what was your biggest surprise out of this election so far. Obviously, there are still some elections to be called, but okay, I'm going to take the president off the,
like, well.
the table. So, other than that, what race or election most surprised you and why? Tim?
I'm going to go local and a little in the weeds, but it's an issue we've been following at PRI. So there was a measure in Sonoma County. I believe it was Measure J. And the measure involves, it basically would have, as a practical matter, kind of outlawed animal agriculture in the county. And there's kind of a policy in the weeds issue behind it. So we passed, state voters passed Prop 12 a few years ago, which was restrictions on like pork and veal production and egg production. And there was an interesting kind of, like a separation of powers kind of issue with it, where Californians passing that law, well, could that indirectly be we're imposing our law on other states, on pork producers and veal producers in other states? And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and PRI filed an amicus brief in that case, and actually Prop 12 won. So California law is indirectly being enforced now in all of these other states. So we've been kind of following this issue. There have been legislation along these lines in other areas, and this measure was a test case for what would the next kind of effort be to have a law that would pass that could be one of those kind of California laws embraced in other states. And you'd think, well, Sonoma County, that'd be an easy win, right? 85% no vote.
Wow.
Because, again, locals looking at it locally, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. A huge hit to the economy if you lose. And I believe it's the Clover Dairy Company is big in Sonoma County. They would kind of put them out of business.
Oh, I love their stuff.
Yeah. So I found that interesting that measure not only failed, but failed so significantly. And that would have been for sure, if it passed there would have been a statewide push for that in the next 2 or 4 years.
Very good. Melissa, your biggest surprise?
Well, we don't have all the votes in yet, but so far, Prop 5 is losing.
And what is that?
Okay, yeah, who knows? But it's statewide measure bonds for affordable housing and infrastructure. Now, generally speaking, Californians never met a bond we didn't like. Neither has San Franciscans, right? Like every time there's a bond on the ballot, we immediately forget that we've voted for something very similar in the previous election, and the previous election. And so we tend to just sort of rubber stamp bonds in the state, and certainly for something like affordable housing and infrastructure. I mean, who's against that, right? But it is losing 56 to 44%. And it tells me that people might be suddenly a little more skeptical of the way this money is being spent, right? We've seen time and time again, large allocations of money and then nothing happens, right? And then, the prices are still what they are, and we don't see an alleviation of the housing issues. And so it tells me that there is at least a decent number of folks who are saying, this is it, no more. You need to deal with the money we've given you, or we want better assurances, or we are really sort of tapped out on this. Like, money is not the problem anymore, right? Money, right? You've got regulation issues and other issues. Like, it's not that you lack money to fix these problems. We want you to deal with what you have. And that was really, of course, it's passing in San Francisco, but statewide where it matters, it's actually losing, which is just something that's really remarkable.
Joe?
I'm going to go back to my home city of Oakland and a race that has not been called yet, but there's an at-large council seat there. and the former police chief of Oakland is LaRon Armstrong is losing as at this point. It's not called; it still could happen, but. And I was really interested to see if he was going to win, because Mayor Sheng Tao has been recalled, and so the person, as there's a very complicated. This is like a scene from Succession, but it's like so there's the council president would replace her as soon as the vote is certified. But the council president is also running for the board of supervisors. So if she were to win that race, then it would go to someone else. And and because there's 3 new council members, they could vote a different person to be the next in line. And so if there's a possibility that it could have been they could have voted the police chief to be that person. So Tao, who part of her demise would have been because she fired the police chief, could then have been replaced for a few months until they call a real election by the guy she fired. It would have been a big, you're going to fire me? Well, I got your job now. That would have been just a kind of a fun, like a take this job and shove it kind of moment. But I don't think it's going to happen because of a lot of this, like the council president is losing her race. So she'll probably, her consolation prize will be Mayor of Oakland, temporary Mayor of Oakland until they call a real election in the spring. So, and second place is Mayor of Oakland.
Yes. Congratulations.
So with Republicans in control of, let's face it, the Supreme Court, the Senate, possibly the House, and the White House, someone asks kind of like, who is the Democratic Party leader? Is there going to be a big fight for this, or is there someone you think is positioned for that?
Well, we might have a governor who wants to be the Democratic Party leader. I mean, I think you naturally, when you're kind of the out party and that kind of time when you're figuring out where do we go from here and all of that, there's a lot of voices that are vying to be the loudest person in the room. And, I bet you our governor will be one of those people wanting to assert himself. But you've got, the 2028 clock starts ticking now. So anyone who's had any thought of ever wanting to be president, they're going to start the stunts and the press conferences and put me on your show and all that. We were joking with a friend, which Democrat will come out with, we need to start a petition to stop the effort to amend the Constitution so Trump can run for a 3rd term,
Chuck
which is
Schumer
never going to
already
happen.
got a text.
Did you?
Yeah, from Chuck Schumer.
Seriously?
Personally, I'm sure, but from no, seriously, to sign the petition
Right.
to get Chuck Schumer to pass the No Kings as Tyrants Act or whatever. Yeah, so already. Anyway, I'm not saying Chuck Schumer's going to be the guy, but you could also see Hakeem Jeffries, for example, whose profile has certainly gone up. Even depending on where the party wants to go, somebody like a John Fetterman, who has really been out front and really sort of pointed to left. Not well. I don't want. That's probably the wrong metaphor. But he really sort of raised the alarm about what was happening in Pennsylvania in a way that was, not what his party wanted him to say, and not what anyone wanted to hear, but ended up being very true. And I think so. He's got some credibility based on things like that. So
I think you're right on. Newsom wants to be. There should be like an MSNBC primary,
Yes.
and I think a couple of finalists would be Newsom because they love him, and Mayor Pete.
Yes.
Mayor Pete,
Yeah.
yes. The Democrats love Mayor Pete, the man who speaks in full paragraphs,
Yes.
and who has the guts to go on Fox too,
Yeah.
Right.
and does well there.
And then you got to ask the big question, of course, is what's Kamala Harris's future? Does she, she's got a big list. She raised a record amount of money. So you can, even if you don't raise a lot from that list, that's a lot of money to keep floating and paying for your travels and doing whatever you want to do going forward. Does she want to run again? Does she want to run for some other office?
I think there might be a switch. Right?
Might
I
be.
mean, my thought was, right, so
Oh.
I'm sorry, I know
Oh.
we're going to get to this, but like my thought was sort of one of the biggest losers of this day is somebody like Eleni Kounalakis, who's looking to be the next governor after Governor Newsom is termed out. And there are some folks like Eleni, our lieutenant governor, who feel they're very much in line to take this spot. And now we have Kamala Harris, who needs a gig, and and she's popular here in California at least, and certainly has a lot of donors and money at her disposal. It certainly beats getting a real job, right? Like,
I don't know. I don't see her doing that because you're going from Air Force Two to like a chopper.
Wait. Richard Nixon.
That's
Richard
right.
Nixon, 62, did it. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, didn't do it.
He didn't,
Wasn't-
right, but he tried to do it.
to do it. Yes. Isn't that when he lost and he said, "You're not going to have Dick
Yes.
Nixon
Yeah.
kick around
Yeah.
anymore"?
Yeah.
At least for the next 6 years.
Yes.
Hindsight is wonderful, someone writes. What if Biden had announced 2 years ago that he wouldn't run again?
Yeah.
It would have changed
That-
the whole playing field.
The
right?
whole thing, right?
And who knows if she would have been the nominee?
Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a much different primary season. Do you think Trump will willingly leave office when his term ends in 2029?
well, so technically he can't run a third time, right? If
Right.
the Constitution is a thing you care about, then it says you can't be elected president more than twice, right? So it doesn't have to be in a row, just more than twice on the whole. So technically he wouldn't be able to run or stay after this term. So for
He
what
can't
it's
come
worth.
back like 20 years later, like
No.
Jerry Brown did, and
Yeah.
serve another 2 terms.
No, or Aaron Peskin
Aaron
here,
Peskin,
you know.
that's what I was thinking.
No. So again, that assumes you care about what's in it, and if you do, if he did, then he would have to leave and not be able to run for re-election. So, for what it's worth, technically he shouldn't be running for re-election. Yeah, that's why I'm caveating that. But so, will he leave at the end? That remains to be.
Okay. Well, someone starts at the other end of his term and asks, frankly, an unanswerable question here, but I'm going to use it to jump off to something else. How much of Trump's 2024 program can he actually do? More, because who knows? But what do you think he'll go after first when he's got the most energy and, united Congress behind him?
Right.
Well, he said day one, I'm going to start the deportation program, which that is the heaviest of heavy lifts, and that would destroy our communities in terms of even just starting it, trying it, because you have to sift out. Okay, you seem like you're here illegally, but wait, no, I'm here legally, and parents, and because there's a lot of mixed immigration status households, you're tearing families apart. It would not go well, and plus, I think the business community might be his biggest pushback on that because he said, you're going to take away all our labor. Okay. I mean, a colleague did a story about, folks in wine country are very upset about even the specter of this because you'd be damaging the labor force. So, I mean, that's going to be, I think who knows if he's going to start that. Honestly, more infrastructure. It's the easiest stuff to pass. Plus you put people to work. But we saw how that went 8 years ago.
It's hard to discern what his program is because he says things like this, like deport people, but you can imagine him passing a very robust immigration reform package that changes the way people apply for asylum and how long they have to do certain things. I mean, there are ways to sort of tighten down the screws on things that my guess is that Republicans in Congress have a kind of wish list and maybe a draft immigration reform ready to go for him to pass.
Perhaps the one they already wrote. And,
Well, but when
refuse
they
to
don't
support.
necessarily have to negotiate with Democrats anymore,
True.
right? They can take
Right,
all
they
that
can do
stuff
whatever.
out and just leave in the
And
stuff
same
that
with
they
taxes.
like.
There'll be a tax bill. Definitely. That's an
Big
easy
one
lift.
for next year because
Yeah.
the Trump tax cuts expire.
Right.
So what are you going to do on salt? That's an interesting question. The state and local tax deduction, which it's an interesting issue we've explored before because yes, it punishes taxpayers in California and New York, but our argument is you should know that because it's actually the fault of overspending in state government why your tax bill is so high. And why are you as taxpayers in the rest of the country subsidizing tax breaks for people in California and New York? That was a huge political loser for politicians in New York and California and could be again. The leadership on that has said we're open to doing something, but not a full repeal. So that's going to be a huge issue for them to get through. But I think they're going to start with, as I was saying earlier, the regulatory repeals, because those are easy, pretty easy and unifying, and there's lots of lists of those things, and that's the type of thing you could do on day one.
And that's like administrative stuff. It doesn't need to go through Congress.
It depends how far along the regulation is.
Okay.
So if it's past the review period and it's in effect, you have to pass a bill. But those are bills like, I guarantee on the first day of Congress, after Trump is sworn in, you'll have at least one of those bills, probably passing both houses. So I would say that and the reconciliation, that's going to be the first big stamp.
Okay, folks, that is our time, except we're going to do our news quiz, and I elect, and I hope she agrees to fulfill her duties, if so chosen by voters, Colette to be our chocolate delivery person.
Oh.
So I'll ask a question. If you think you know the answer, raise your hand. Please don't just call
My
out.
favorite part of the whole show.
Yes.
Yes.
And then if you get it right, Colette will give you some chocolate.
These aren't the Halloween leftovers. This is new,
No,
good
this is
chocolate.
legit Ghirardelli.
All brand new today.
Okay.
Are there any
Homemade.
Three Musketeers in there?
We've come to the end of our program. I want to thank our great panel, Joe Garofoli, Melissa Kane, Tim Anaya, and thanks to all of you. Folks, have a good rest of your week. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we'll see you again soon.